The Birth of Tragedy, recorded by Kairos of the Threefold Manifold, June 11th, 2025. Part 2. An Attempt at Self-Criticism. 1. Whatever may lie at the bottom of this doubtful book must be a question of the first rank in attractiveness, moreover, a deeply personal question. In proof thereof, observe the time in which it originated, in spite of which it originated, the exciting period of the Franco-German War of 1870 through 71. While the thunder of the Battle of Wörth rolled over Europe, the ruminator and riddle lover, who had to be the parent of this book, sat somewhere in a nook on the Alps, lost in riddles and ruminations, consequently very much concerned and unconcerned at the same time, and wrote down his meditations on the Greeks, the kernel of the curious and almost inaccessible book to which this belated prologue or epilogue is to be devoted. A few weeks later, and he found himself under the walls of Metz, still wrestling with the notes of interrogation he had set down concerning the alleged cheerfulness of the Greeks and of Greek art, till at last, in that month of deep suspense, when peace was debated at Versailles, he too attained to peace with himself, and, slowly recovering from a disease brought home from the field, made up his mind definitely regarding the birth of tragedy from the spirit of music. From music? Music and tragedy? Greeks and tragic music? Greeks and the artwork of pessimism, a race of men, well-fashioned, beautiful, envied, life-inspiring, like no other race hitherto. The Greeks, indeed. The Greeks were in need of tragedy, yea, of art. Wherefore Greek art? We can thus guess where the great note of interrogation concerning the value of existence had been set. Is pessimism necessarily the sign of decline, of decay, of failure, of exhausted and weakened instincts? As was the case with the Indians, as is to all appearance the case with us modern men and Europeans. Is there a pessimism of strength? An intellectual predilection for what is hard, awful, evil, problematical in existence, owing to well-being, to exuberant health, to fullness of existence? Is there perhaps suffering in overfullness itself? A seductive fortitude with the keenest of glances, which yearns for the terrible, as for the enemy, the worthy enemy, with whom it may try its strength? From whom it is willing to learn what fear is, what means tragic, myth of the Greeks, of the best, strongest, bravest era, and the prodigious phenomenon of the Dionysian, that which was born thereof, tragedy, and again, that of which tragedy died, the Socratism of morality, the dialectics, contentedness, and cheerfulness of the theoretical man, indeed. Might not this very Socratism be a sign of decline, of weariness, of disease, of anarchically disintegrating instincts, and the Hellenic cheerfulness of the later Hellenism merely a glowing sunset? The Epicurean will counter to pessimism merely a precaution of the sufferer. And science itself, our science, viewed as a symptom of life, what really signifies all science? Whither were still, whence all science? Well, is scientism perhaps only fear and evasion of pessimism, a subtle defense against truth? Morally speaking, something like falsehood and cowardice, and unmorally speaking, an artifice? Oh, Socrates, Socrates, was this, perhaps, thy secret? O mysterious ironist, was this, perhaps, thine irony? 2. What I then laid hands on, something terrible and dangerous, a problem with horns, not necessarily a bull itself, but at all events a new problem. I should say today it was the problem of science itself. Science, conceived for the first time as problematic, as questionable. but the book in which my youthful ardor and suspicion then discharged themselves. What an impossible book must needs grow out of a task so disagreeable to youth, constructed of naught but precocious, unripened self-experiences, all of which lay close to the threshold of the communicable, based on the groundwork of art. For the problem of science cannot be discerned on the groundwork of science. A book perhaps for artists, with collateral, analytical, and retrospective aptitudes, that is, an exceptional kind of artists, for whom one must seek, and does not even care to seek, full of psychological innovations and artist's secrets, with an artist's metaphysics in the background, a work of youth, full of youth's mettle and youth's melancholy, independent, defiantly self-sufficient, even when it seems to bow to some authority and self-veneration. In short, a firstling work, even in every bad sense of the term, in spite of its senile problem, affected with every fault of youth, above all with youth's prolixity and youth's storm and stress. On the other hand, in view of the success it had, especially with the great artist to whom it addressed itself, as it were, in a duologue, Richard Wagner, a demonstrated book, I mean a book which, at any rate, sufficed for the best of its time. On this account, if for no other reason, it should be treated with some consideration and reserve. Yet I shall not altogether conceal how disagreeable it now appears to me, how after 16 years it stands a total stranger before me, before an eye which is more mature, and 100 times more fastidious, but which has by no means grown colder, nor lost any of its interest in that self-same task, essayed for the first time by this daring book, to view science through the optics of the artist, and art, moreover, through the optics of life. 3. I say again, today, it is an impossible book to me. I call it badly written, heavy, painful, image-angling, and image-entangling, maudlin, sugared at times even to feminism, uneven in tempo, void of the will to logical cleanliness, very convinced and therefore rising above the necessity of demonstration, distrustful even of the propriety of demonstration, as being a book for initiates, as music for those who are baptized with the name of music, who are united from the beginning of things by common ties of rare experiences in art, as a countersign for blood relations in artibus. A haughty and fantastic book, which from the very first withdraws even more from the profanum vulgus of the cultured than from the people, but which also, as its effect has shown, it still shows, knows very well how to seek fellow enthusiasts and lure them to new byways and dancing grounds. Here, at any rate, thus much was acknowledged with curiosity as well as with aversion. A strange voice spoke, the disciple of a still unknown God, who for the time being had hidden himself under the hood of the scholar, under the German's gravity and disinclination for dialectics, even under the bad manners of the Wagnerian. Here was a spirit with strange and still nameless needs, a memory bristling with questions, experiences, and obscurities, beside which stood the name Dionysos, like one more note of interrogation. Here spoke, people said to themselves with misgivings, something like a mystic and almost monadic soul, which, undecided whether it should disclose or conceal itself, stammers with an effort and capriciously as in a strange tongue. It should have sung, this new soul, and not spoken. What a pity that I did not dare to say what I then had to say as a poet. I could have done so, perhaps, or at least as a philologist. For even at present day, well nigh everything in this domain remains to be discovered and disinterred by the philologist. Above all, the problem. That, here there is a problem before us, and that, so long as we have no answer to the question, what is Dionysian? The Greeks are now, as ever, wholly unknown and inconceivable. 4. What is Dionysian? In this book may be found an answer. A knowing one speaks here, the votary and disciple of his god. Perhaps I should now speak more guardedly and less eloquently of a psychological question so difficult as the origins of tragedy among the Greeks. A fundamental question is the relation of the Greek to pain, his degree of sensibility. Did this relation remain constant, or did it veer about? The question, whether his ever-increasing longing for beauty, for festivals, gaieties, new cults, did really grow out of want, privation, melancholy, pain? For suppose even this to be true, and Pericles, or Thucydides, intimates as much in the great funeral speech. Whence then the opposite longing which appeared first in the order of time, the longing for the ugly, the good, resolute desire for the old Hellene, for pessimism, for tragic myth, for the picture of all that is terrible, evil, enigmatical, destructive, fatal, as the basis of existence, whence then must tragedy have sprung? Perhaps from joy, from strength, from exuberant health, from overfullness. From overfullness. And what then, physiologically speaking, is the meaning of that madness, out of which comic as well as tragic art has grown, the Dionysian madness? What, perhaps madness is not necessarily the symptom of degeneration, of decline, of belated culture? Perhaps there are, a question for alienists, neuroses of health, of folk youth and youthfulness. What does that synthesis of God and goat in the satyr point to? What self-experience, what stress made the Greek think of the Dionysian reveler and primitive man as a satyr? And as regards the origin of the tragic chorus, perhaps there were endemic ecstasies in the eras when the Greek body bloomed and the Greek soul brimmed over with life. Visions and hallucinations which took hold of entire communities, entire cult assemblies. What if the Greeks, in the very wealth of their youth, had the will to be tragic and were pessimists? What if it was madness itself, to use a word of Plato's, which brought the greatest blessings upon Hellas? And what if, on the other hand, and conversely, at the very same time of their dissolution and weakness, the Greeks became always more optimistic, more superficial, more histrionic, also more ardent for logic and the logicizing of the world, consequently, at the same time more cheerful and more scientific? Aye, despite all modern ideas and prejudices of the democratic taste, may not the triumph of optimism, the common sense that has gained the upper hand, the practical and theoretical utilitarianism, like democracy itself, with which it is synchronous, be symptomatic of declining vigor, of approaching age, of physiological weariness, and not at all pessimism? Was Epicurus an optimist because a sufferer? We see it is a whole bundle of weighty questions which this book has taken upon itself. Let us not fail to add its weightiest question. Viewed through the optics of life, what is the meaning of morality? 5. Already in the foreword to Richard Wagner, art, and not morality, is set down as the properly metaphysical activity of man. In the book itself, the piquant proposition recurs time and again, that the existence of the world is justified only as an aesthetic phenomenon. In the book itself, the piquant proposition recurs time and again. Indeed, the entire book recognizes only an artist thought, an artist after thought, behind all occurrence, a god, if you will. but certainly only an altogether thoughtless and unmoral artist god, who, as in construction, as in destruction, in good as in evil, desires to become conscious of his own equable joy and sovereign glory, who, in creating worlds, frees himself from the anguish of fullness and overfullness, from the suffering of the contradictions concentrated within him. The world, that is, the redemption of God, attained at every moment as the perpetually changing, perpetually new vision of the most suffering, most antithetical, most contradictory being who contrives to redeem himself only in appearance. This entire artist metaphysics, call it arbitrary, idle, fantastic, if you will. The point is that it already betrays a spirit which is determined some day at all hazards to make a stand against the moral interpretation and significance of life. Here, perhaps for the first time, a pessimism beyond good and evil announces itself. Here, that perverseness of disposition obtains expression and formulation against which Schopenhauer never grew tired of hurling beforehand his angriest imprecations and thunderbolts. A philosophy which dares to derogatorily put, morality itself in the world of phenomena, and not only among phenomena, in the sense of the idealistic terminus technicus, but among the illusions as appearance, semblance, error, interpretation, accommodation, art. Perhaps the depth of this anti-moral tendency may be best estimated from the guarded and hostile silence with which Christianity is treated throughout this book. Christianity as being the most extravagant burlesque of the moral theme to which mankind has hitherto been obliged to listen. In fact, to the purely aesthetic world interpretation and justification taught in this book, there is no greater antithesis than the Christian dogma, which is only and will be only moral, and which, with its absolute standards, for instance, its truthfulness of God, relegates, that is, disowns, convicts, condemns art, all art, to the realm of falsehood. Behind such a mode of thought and valuation, which, if at all genuine, must be hostile to art, I always experienced what was hostile to life, the wrathful, vindictive counterwill to life itself. For all art rests on appearance, art, illusion, optics, necessity of perspective, and error. From the very first, Christianity was essentially and thoroughly the nausea and surfeit of life for life, which only disguised and concealed and decked itself out under the belief of another or better life. The hatred of the world, the curse on the affections, the fear of beauty and sensuality, another world invented for the purpose of slandering this world the more. At bottom, a longing for nothingness, for the end, for rest, for the Sabbath of Sabbaths, all this, as also the unconditional will of Christianity, to recognize only moral values, has always appeared to me as the most dangerous and ominous of all possible forms of a will to perish, at the least as the symptom of a most fatal disease, of profoundest weariness, despondency, exhaustion, impoverishment of life. For before the tribunal of morality, especially Christian, that is, unconditional morality, life must constantly and inevitably be the loser, because life is something essentially unmoral. Indeed, oppressed with the weight of contempt and the everlasting no, life must finally be regarded as unworthy of desire, as in itself unworthy. Morality itself, what? May not morality be a will to disown life? A secret instinct for annihilation, a principle of decay, of deprecation, of slander, a beginning of the end, and consequently the danger of dangers? It was against morality, therefore, that my instinct as an intercessory instinct for life turned in this questionable book, inventing for itself a fundamental counter, dogma, and counter-valuation of life, purely artistic, purely anti-Christian. What should I call it? As a philologist and man of words, I baptized it, not without some liberty, for who could be sure of the proper name of the Antichrist? With the name of a Greek god, I called it Dionysian. 6. You see the problem which I ventured to touch upon in this early work, how I now regret that I had not then the courage or modesty to allow myself in all respects the use of an individual language for such individual contemplations and ventures in the field of thought that I labored to express in Kantian and Schopenhauerian formulae, strange and new valuations, which ran fundamentally counter to the spirit of Kant and Schopenhauer, as well as to their tastes. What, forsooth, were Schopenhauer's views on tragedy? What gives, he says in Welt als Will und Vorstellung 2, 495, to all tragedy, that singular swing towards elevation is the awakening of the knowledge that the world, that life, cannot satisfy us thoroughly, and consequently is not worthy of our attachment. In this consists the tragic spirit. It therefore leads to resignation. Oh, how differently Dionysos spoke to me! Oh, how far from me, then, was just this entire resignationism! But there is something far worse in this book, which now I regret even more than having obscured and spoiled Dionysian anticipations with Schopenhauerian formulae. To wit, that, in general, I spoiled the grand Hellenic problem, as it had opened up before me by the admixture of the most modern things, that I entertained hopes where nothing was to be hoped for, where everything pointed all too clearly to an approaching end, that, on the basis of our latter-day German music, I began to fable about the spirit of Teutonism, as if it were on the point of discovering and returning to itself, aye, at the very time that the German spirit, which was not so very long before he had the will to the lordship over Europe, the strength to lead and govern Europe, testamentarily and conclusively resigned, and under the pompous pretense of empire founding, effected its transition to mediocratization, democracy, and modern ideas. In very fact, I have since learned to regard this spirit of Teutonism as something to be despaired and unsparingly treated, as also our present German music, which is romanticism through and through, and the most un-Grecian of all possible forms of art, and moreover a first-rate nerve-destroyer, doubly dangerous for a people given to drinking and revering the unclear as a virtue, namely, in its twofold capacity of an intoxicating and stupefying narcotic. Of course, apart from all precipitate hopes and faulty applications to matters specially modern, with which I then spoiled my first book, the great Dionysian note of interrogation, as set down therein, continues standing on, even with reference to music, how we must conceive of a music which is no longer of romantic origin, like the German, but of Dionysian. 7. But, my dear sir, if your book is not romanticism, what in the world is it? Can the deep hatred of the present, of reality and modern ideas be pushed farther than has been done in your artist metaphysics, which would rather believe in nothing or in the devil than in the now? Does not a radical bass of wrath and annihilative pleasure growl on beneath all your contrapuntal vocal art and oral seduction, a mad determination to oppose all that now is? A will which is not so very far removed from practical nihilism, and which seems to say, rather let nothing be true than that you should be in the right, than that your truth should prevail. Hear yourself, my dear sir pessimist and art deifier, with ever so unlocked ears a single select passage of your own book, that not ineloquent dragon-slayer passage which may sound insidiously rat-charming to young ears and hearts. What? Is not that the true blue romanticist confession of 1830 under the mask of the pessimism of 1850? After which, of course, the usual romanticist finale at once strikes up. Rupture, collapse, return, and prostration before an old belief, before the old God. What? Is not your pessimist book itself a piece of anti-Hellenism and romanticism? Something equally intoxicating and befogging, a narcotic at all events, aye, a piece of music, of German music? But listen, let us imagine a rising generation with this undauntedness of vision, the heroic impulse towards the prodigious. Let us imagine the bold step of these dragon slayers, the proud daring with which they turn their backs on all the effeminate doctrines of optimism, in order to live resolutely, in the whole and in the full. Would it not be necessary for the tragic man of this culture, with his self-discipline to earnestness and terror, to desire a new art, the art of metaphysical comfort, tragedy, as the Helena belonging to him, and that he should exclaim with Faust, "And shall not I, by mightiest desire, in living shape that soul fair form acquire"? Would it not be necessary? No, thrice no! Ye young romanticist, it would not be necessary. But it is very probable that things may end thus, and ye may end thus, namely, comforted, as it is written, in spite of all self-discipline, to earnestness and terror, metaphysically comforted, in short, as romanticists are wont to end, as Christians. No! Ye should first of all learn the art of earthly comfort. Ye should learn to laugh, my young friends, if ye are at all determined to remain pessimists. If so, you will perhaps, as laughing ones, eventually send all metaphysical comfortism to the devil, and metaphysics first of all. Or, to say it in the language of that Dionysian ogre called Zarathustra, lift up your hearts, my brethren, higher, and do not forget your legs. Lift up also your legs, ye good dancers, and better still if ye stand also on your heads. This crown of the laughter, the rose-garland crown, I myself have put on this crown. I myself have consecrated my laughter. No one else have I found today strong enough for this. Zarathustra the dancer, Zarathustra the light one, who beckoneth with his pinions, one ready for flight, beckoning unto all birds, ready and prepared, a blissful, light-spirited one. Zarathustra the soothsayer, Zarathustra the sooth-laugher, no impatient one, no absolute one, one who loveth leaps and side-leaps. I myself have put on this crown of the laughter, this rose-garland crown. To you, my brethren, do I cast this crown. Laughing have I consecrated, ye higher men. Learn, I pray you, to laugh. Thus spake Zarathustra. 73, 17, 18, and 20. Sils Maria, Oberingadine, August 1886. The Birth of Tragedy, from the Spirit of Music. 1. We shall have gained much for the science of aesthetics when once we have perceived not only by logical inference, but by the immediate certainty of intuition, that the continuous development of art is bound up with the duplexity of the Apollonian and the Dionysian. In like manner, as procreation is dependent on the duality of the sexes, involving perpetual conflicts with only periodically intervening reconciliations. These names we borrow from the Greeks, who disclosed to the intelligent observer the profound mysteries of their view of art, not indeed in concepts, but in the impressively clear figures of their world of deities. It is in connection with Apollo and Dionysus, the two art deities of the Greeks, that we learn that there existed in the Grecian world a wide antithesis in origin and aims between the art of the shaper, the Apollonian, and the non-plastic art of music, that of Dionysus. Both these so heterogeneous tendencies run parallel to each other, for the most part openly at variance, and continually inciting each other to new and more powerful births, to perpetuate in them the strife of this antithesis, which is but seemingly bridged over by their mutual term art, till at last, by a metaphysical miracle of the Hellenic will, they appear paired with each other, and through this pairing eventually generate the equally Dionysian and Apollonian artwork of Attic tragedy. In order to bring these two tendencies within closer range, let us conceive them first of all as the separate art worlds of dreamland and drunkenness, between which physiological phenomena a contrast may be observed, analogous to that existing between the Apollonian and the Dionysian. In dreams, according to the conception of Lucretius, the glorious divine figures first appeared to the souls of men. In dreams, the great shaper beheld the charming corporeal structure of superhuman beings, and the Hellenic poet, if consulted on the mysteries of poetic inspiration, would likewise have suggested dreams, and would have offered an explanation resembling that of Hans Sachs in the Meistersingers. Believe me, man's truest madness is revealed to him in his dreams. All poetry and poetic endeavors are nothing but the interpretation of true dreams. The beauteous appearance of the dream worlds, in the production of which every man is a perfect artist, is the presupposition of all plastic art, and in fact, as we shall see, of an important half of poetry also. We take delight in the immediate apprehension of form. All forms speak to us. There is nothing indifferent, nothing superfluous. But together with the highest life of this dream reality, we also have, glimmering through it, the sensation of its appearance. Such at least is my experience as to the frequency, aye, normality of which I could adduce many proofs, as also the sayings of the poets. Indeed, the man of philosophic turn has a foreboding that underneath this reality in which we live and have our being, another and altogether different reality lies concealed, and that therefore it is also an appearance. And Schopenhauer actually designates the gift of occasionally regarding men and things as mere phantoms and dream pictures as the criterion of philosophical ability. Accordingly, the man susceptible to art stands in the same relation to the reality of dreams as the philosopher to the reality of existence. He is a close and willing observer, for from these pictures he reads the meaning of life, and by these processes he trains himself for life. And it is perhaps not only the agreeable and friendly pictures that he realizes in himself with such perfect understanding, the earnest, the troubled, the dreary, the gloomy, the sudden checks, the tricks of fortune, the uneasy presentiments, in short, the whole divine comedy of life, and the inferno also pass before him, not merely like pictures on the wall, for he too lives and suffers in these scenes, and yet not without that fleeting sensation of appearance. And perhaps many a one will, like myself, recollect having sometimes called out cheeringly, and not without success, amid the dangers and terrors of dream life, "It is a dream! I will dream on!" I have likewise been told of persons capable of continuing the causality of one and the same dream for 3 and even more successive nights, all of which facts clearly testify that our innermost being, the common substratum of all of us, experiences our dreams with deep joy and cheerful acquiescence. This cheerful acquiescence in the dream experience has likewise been embodied by the Greeks in their Apollo. For Apollo, as the god of all shaping energies, is also the soothsaying god. He who, as the etymology of the name indicates, is the Shining One, the deity of light, also rules over the fair appearance of the inner world of fantasies. The higher truth, the perfection of these states in contrast to the only partially intelligible everyday world. The deep consciousness of nature, healing and helping in sleeping and dream, is at the same time the symbolical analog of the faculty of soothsaying and, in general, of the arts, through which life is made possible and worth living, but also that delicate line which the dream picture must not overstep, lest it act pathologically, in which case appearance, being reality pure and simple would impose upon us, must not be wanting in the picture of Apollo. That measured limitation, that freedom from the wilder emotions, that philosophical calmness of the sculptor god. His eye must be sunlight, according to his origin, even when it is angry and looks displeased. The sacredness of his beauteous appearance is still there. And so we might apply to Apollo, in an eccentric sense, what Schopenhauer says of the man wrapped in the veil of Maya. Welt als Wille und Vorstellung, 1, page 416. Just as in a stormy sea, unbounded in every direction, rising and falling with howling, mountainous waves, a sailor sits in a boat and trusts in his frail bark. So in the midst of a world of sorrows, the individual sits quietly supported by and trusting in his principium individuationis. Indeed, we might say of Apollo, that in him the unshaken faith in his principium and the quiet sitting of the man wrapped therein have received their sublimest expression. And we might even designate Apollo as the glorious divine image of the principium individuationis, from out of the gestures and looks of which all the joy and wisdom of appearance, together with its beauty, speak to us. In the same work, Schopenhauer has described to us the stupendous awe which seizes upon man, when of a sudden he is at a loss to account for the cognitive forms of a phenomenon, in that the principle of reason, in some one of its manifestations, seems to admit of an exception. Add to this awe the blissful ecstasy which rises from the innermost depths of man, of nature, at this same collapse of the principium individuationis, and we shall gain an insight into the being of the Dionysian, which is brought within closest kin, perhaps, by the analogy of drunkenness. It is either under the influence of the narcotic draught of which the hymns of all primitive men and peoples tell us, or by the powerful approach of spring, penetrating all nature with joy, that those Dionysian emotions awake, in the augmentation of which the subjective vanishes to complete self-forgetfulness. So also in the German Middle Ages singing and dancing crowds, ever increasing in number, were borne from place to place, under the same Dionysian power. In these St. John's and St. Vitius's dancers, we again perceive the Bacchic choruses of the Greeks with their previous history in Asia Minor. As far back as Babylon and the orgiastic Sakia, there are some who, from lack of experience or obtuseness, will turn away from such phenomena as folk diseases with a smile of contempt or pity prompted by the consciousness of their own health. Of course, the poor wretches do not divine what a cadaverous-looking and ghastly aspect this very health of theirs presents when the glowing life of the Dionysian revelers rushes past them. Under the charm of the Dionysian, not only is the covenant between man and man again established, but also estranged. Hostile or subjugated nature again celebrates her reconciliation with her lost son, man. Of her own accord, earth proffers her gifts, and peacefully the beasts of prey approach from the desert and the rocks. The chariot of Dionysus is bedecked with flowers and garlands. Panthers and tigers pass beneath his yoke. Change Beethoven's Jubilee song into a painting, and if your imagination be equal to the occasion when the awestruck millions sink into the dust, you will then be able to approach the Dionysian. Now is the slave a free man. Now all the stubborn, hostile barriers which necessity, caprice, or shameless fashion has set up between man and man are broken down. Now, at the evangel of cosmic harmony, each one feels himself not only united, reconciled, blended with his neighbor, but as one with him, as if the veil of Maya has been torn, and were now merely fluttering in tatters before the mysterious primordial unity. In song and in dance, man exhibits himself as a member of a higher community. He has forgotten how to walk and speak, and is on the point of taking a dancing flight into the air. His gestures bespeak enchantment. Even as the animals now talk, and as the earth yields milk and honey, so also something supernatural sounds forth from him. He feels himself a god. He himself now walks about enchanted and elated, even as the gods whom he saw walking about in his dreams. Man is no longer an artist. He has become a work of art. The artistic power of all nature here reveals itself in the tremors of drunkenness to the highest gratification of the primordial unity. The noblest clay, the costliest marble, namely man, is here kneaded and cut, and the chisel strokes of the Dionysian world artist are accompanied with the cry of the Eleusinian mysteries. Thee bow in the dust, O millions, thy maker, mortal, dost divine. I thank you all for being here with me today, and I hope that you enjoyed it. If you didn't, please do give me feedback, critique, commentary, and whatever you think might make this better. You can find ways to do that in the comments section, on my social media on X, Instagram, Bitchute, or on Discord in the Threefold Edifactory, all linked in the descriptions. If you did like it, you can go there to find more content, and if you really liked it, you can foremost share it with those who you think might like it the best. Or if you'd like to do so monetarily, there is Streamelements for a one-time donation, or Patreon starting at $5 if you'd like to contribute more regularly. But without any further ado, I hope that you all never miss your opportunities.